switch things around. So thank you for being here. Thank you for waiting. If you waited for us, we appreciate it. And we're just so happy to be able to be with you, and we're live. So that's even better. So thank you so much. We have today a really wonderful panel of women who this discussion is going to be close to their hearts. So I want to just make sure that you know that you're in good hands here. We have Catherine Laws, Sunday Gilchrist, and Lorna Champion for Change. There she is. So grateful to have you all with us. And we have some interesting questions that we're going to be discussing today about grief. And the reason why I put that doorway there is because grief is often thought of as like a stopping point, but I really see it as a doorway to deeper healing. And grief doesn't have to be from the loss of a loved one. It could be loss of a lifestyle. It could be some loss in your life that's created a situation where you're in grief about it. It could happen when you're very young. It could happen when you're older. It could be something you overheard. It doesn't have to be something that's like up in your face, but for some reason it's been taken on and now it's causing this experience of grief. So thank you all for being here. And I'd love to hear what you have about grief that first comes to top of mind for you. What do you think about grief? And Sunday, we'll start with you. That's okay.
Thank you. So top of the pops for me is about feelings. So through the experience of grief, I had to learn about how to handle my feelings, and the tsunami like surges of internal pain, which is way more than, well, it was way more than anxiety or just going to adjust my glasses here so I don't get that glare. Way more than anxiety, on a par with depression. And in fact, I thought I was depressed. And then when I realized it's grief, processing them, learning my grief song, learning how to process these feelings out of my body, which involved my own unique style. As my experience is that everybody does it differently, and I'm noisy and messy, and who I could go to so that I could be, I needed witnessing, I needed holding when I was in those spaces of passing. It was almost like giving birth to something.
Hence the doorway, right? This is the big doorway. Exactly. You need a doula to help you with your grief. You need someone standing by holding that space for you. That's awesome. Thank you. Was there more that you wanted to say?
Yeah, no, thank you. That'll do for now. Yeah.
Lorna, Catherine, who wants to go?
Oh gosh, I can really only sort of explain in terms of the first major grief in my life, but it affected all my family when my father died, and none of us knew what to do, and so in a way we couldn't even help each other, and finding someone out there to help just wasn't around at the time. So I suppose in a way it was all just pushed down, and life carried on. So
yeah,
it wasn't processed, you know. It was painful. I mean, it's obviously extremely painful for my mother, but you know, it none of us knew how to deal with it.
And I think a lot of times people turn to their church or their clergy, and they often don't know what to do with it either.
No, actually, that was when I switched off religion.
Yeah,
completely.
Because if the person that you go to doesn't know, they don't know what to do, then they feel like there's nothing to do. There's nothing that you can do. Yeah, that makes it doubly sad. Lorna, how about you? What comes to mind with grief for you?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, both Sunday and, like you said yourself as well, Tanya, about the portal. I knew nothing about that, and even like Catherine said of her dad, it was my grandfather. That was the first, but I didn't even know what grief was. And Sunday, you mentioned about the feelings. That was when my grandmother actually slapped me. she, you know, because I was hysterical. And then it's back to that. I had to do that for your own good because you were hysterical. You know, and I was like, okay, and then you're given the option to go to the funeral. And I was like, no, because I know I'm going to be hysterical, so I can't go. I'm not going to go. And then hearing that my best friend, I was 11 at the time, and also started menstruating at that same age as well. So there was two big things happening for me at that age. So, but I didn't know what grief was. I hadn't a clue. I just knew that I wanted to start screaming at that point. You know, I just wanted to be hysterical. And then years later, you find out, and that's how the women in the village used to actually deal with grief. That's what they did. They called it keening in the north of Scotland. They called it keening, where they would just sit and they would rock and they would wail. And that was their way of shifting it through the body. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I knew I could name these feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about feelings. You know,
It's like, yeah, my mid-40s before I could actually name something as grief. Yeah. Yeah.
it's quite intense to have these feelings, especially as a child, and not have any way to identify them. When I'm doing healing with my patients and clients, we're naming those feelings, we're tapping on them, we're breathing with them, we're doing all these things physically that change what our physiology is doing. And every single feeling that you have ever had creates your physiology. It creates how your body's working. So when these things go unacknowledged, when they're told they're wrong, when they're submerged, then that causes even greater problems as you grow, because your body is not letting go of it. So we always talk about acknowledging, owning, and honoring our feelings, which is something that I think should be taught from a very young age, because we're starting to understand that now. And the feelings part of it goes right along with becoming a mature, self-actualized person, to be able to experience your feelings and know that it's okay. For me, the grief was as a result. I had grief earlier in my life, but the main thing that I grieved about was the stillborn son that I had in 1994. It was very, very sad. I mean, everybody tells you there's nothing worse than losing a child. And I just thought, okay, well, I'm being hit over the head with a 2x4 of harsh reality. I better pay attention to what's happening here, because as a healer, I need to watch what's happening. I need to observe this and see it, but I also need to feel my feelings. So I was in a very good place to be able to do that, because there were so many people around me that were like, go ahead and feel how you feel, especially my husband. So that was really, really helpful. But let's talk about some of these questions we have. Oh, I love this one, Sunday, that you have. What does it take to be a good griever? I love that question, because I think about the silver 10. I think about women coming around to hold us in our space, to be able to have those feelings. And that's what the silver 10's really all about, is that support system.
Do you want me to, what makes a good griever?
Yeah. Well, I thought you might like.
So I thought, there was something else that just popped up around this feelings thing. Like, so I remember when I was young, you can see, looking back, moments where you've had a loss as a child, and how very often my experience and my understanding is that when we lose that first special cuddly toy or thingy blanket that we have, there's so sort of like, either we get a replacement or we get shushed, or like, it's not actually, I think perhaps children's pets are probably the thing that we'd start to practice grieving. But even then, I don't know if we actually get those incremental little steps as little people into bigger people, because then what makes a good griever? And it is about practice. It's about having a grief practice. And I know that sounds a bit like odd, but I think it's worthwhile practicing feeling the emotions, maybe even revisiting some of, you know, when I've got that sense of unease, feeling a little bit like I need to cry, because as we get to this age, I feel I've got lots of grieves inside. They're squirreled away somewhere inside me, and sometimes I'll read something, or I'll smell something, or I'll see something. Smells are incredibly evocative into stirring the feelings. So for me, it is about getting in touch with feelings and having a grief practice, and journaling and writing and reaching out to people who you're on perhaps a grief journey with, you know, having a community of grievers, people who can talk about loss and death and not shy away from those difficult conversations. So there's probably more. And you were adding, you know, the silver tent, somewhere where we can go and share what's going on in our lives. Even though it's online, it's still a space where we can witness ourselves speaking about our loss. So yeah, what makes a good griever for me is for me to remember that actually there's loss most days. And if I can recognize that, so it doesn't become this big carbuncle that I'm carrying around, and then it'll explode and all over me and wipe me
Absolutely. And
out.
everybody around you, and that
Yes.
has to deal with that too. And they'll look, there she goes again, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think Lorna mentioned that, you know, keening is not just there, it's all over the world. People do that. So that whole idea of being able to move it out and being in that group of women who are doing that. This is something that I know that Francesca was really empowered by women coming together, because that's the way we handled grief in the past.
Mhm.
And then we isolated ourselves from each other. And so we don't have that so much. So, Lorna, what do you think about that?
Is this about good grieving?
Yeah. What makes
Yeah.
a good griever?
Yeah, well, you know, this is just my personal preference, would be to do that bawling, and like you say, have people there to support you while you're doing that. And I liked what you said there Sunday as well, because like I thought of Eckhart Tolle when he talks about exiting the pain body, and every day, like every night we exit the pain body, and then, well, we'll reinstate it again the next morning or not. So yeah, it's like, but so it's just every day. I've been thinking about this since we decided to do this talk, and you know, I was just thinking of different people. Everybody's different anyway, and I thought this woman that was in a group I was in, where she'd cry every week for about 6 years about the death of her dad. It was just once every week for 6 years, and that was her way. But I felt that for me, I would have to, when my dad died, I took off in a car, and this was good grieving for me. I just went off in the car for 3 weeks off work. You got 5 days compassionate leave. And I felt I did more grieving while he was alive. I think that was one of my questions. It was like grieving for somebody while they're still here, rather than when they've passed over. So I found it a lot easier once they'd passed than when they're still here. But, I mean, it's been
Very
I
interesting.
find that pain, that emotional pain, is harder for me personally when somebody's still here than from when they've passed on. I find it easier to grieve once they're out of the suit.
I think so
suit.
too. That's
but then
true.
again, I've never, I've never sort of lost a child, for instance, or like you said something about your pets. I used to howl about the least little thing. I howled, and I'm really aware that the women around me couldn't deal with that. They just would have to, oh, here she goes again. You're too highly sensitive,
Oh,
stop
right.
that crying, stop that bawling, it's like, but for me,
Yeah.
it was easier to scream it out. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that answered the question, but
Well, I think it does. I mean, getting it out is really part of being a good griever. Get it out of you. Don't let it sit there and fester. Catherine, what about you?
Oh gosh. I think for me, I've most probably not been a particularly good griever, and I've held so much in my body that it affected my body really intensely. Now I can bawl and scream and, you know, do all those things, but also, and I'm sure we'll come across this in other questions, be able to look back at it from a different level, so that I'm looking at it from above rather than being in it, because most of the time I'm in it. I'm so empathic and watery that I absorb. I remember actually it was at my ex-brother-in-law's, but from my ex-husband's side, at his funeral, and we were talking to his sister, and they ran a pub, and she was behind the bar, and I actually felt everything. I almost felt as though I was losing my man as well. It was like I could feel everything she felt, and it was like, oh my God, you know, a lot. So I tend to be sometimes a bit too open and absorb all of those things. Even where I live now, very close to a point where a lot of people go to leave, and I pick up on that sometimes, and it is so intense. Yeah.
People are choosing to leave.
Yeah.
You're where you live.
Yep. It's one of these spots in England. Yep. Yeah, I see Coast Guard helicopter most days. You know, I see that it's just there, and yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so there could be like a consistent group of people standing there grieving those who have decided to take that route. Yeah, it's very, yeah, there's a sea of feelings out there.
Yes, definitely.
Sea of
Yes.
grief out there. You know, it's covering it's actually covering what the water covers 7/10 of the world, something like that. So does the grief.
And also, when you said about the good grief, it's like, you know, there's been certain circumstances in my life where I felt to leave a situation would be better for everyone, and I thought that would be good grief, but I realized later on down the line I hadn't actually processed that at all, because I didn't know it was that you could have a good grieving for something that would be right for the people involved. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does make sense.
Then because I hadn't dealt with, like Catherine said about being held in the body, because it hadn't been guided in a good way early on, say like when my grandfather died. If that had been guided, maybe I wouldn't have reacted in my adulthood.
Right. When
the way I
people,
did.
yeah, what I found is that when people are reacting so strongly, like say to their pet dying, it's really about something that happened way long ago. And now they're letting it out through the pet. It's not the pet that they're really grieving. It's the loss of their innocence. It's the loss of their parent. It's the loss of their friendships. It's a loss of, you know, why do we have to move when I had this really good friend and then I had no friends? You know, it's all these losses, and then they all get put on the pet. These pets have a lot of work to do for us, right? And so when I see somebody that's, or we experience this, when you're overwhelmed by emotion and it doesn't match what's going on, not that it's bad to, you know, grieve your pet. I'm just saying when it feels like it's not in line with what's in reality, then it's something, that's why I say it's a doorway, because here's all the grief and we're going to work on all of that. We're going to let all of that go through the door, all of it. And so it's not just that one thing that's happening.
Can I share a funny story? Because
Yeah.
it's sort of linked in. So one day I'm just in my local town here, and I don't know if you've ever experienced that uprising of energy and you think, shit, it's coming.
Mhm.
It's really coming, and I've got nowhere to go. So I raced to this place called the Healing Centre, where I just started to be participating in people's offerings there. And I pressed on the bell, and the owner came, and she said, "What is it? What is it?" And I said, "I just need somewhere to, I'm going to burst into tears, and I'm going to be really noisy, and I just need somewhere." So she said, "Well, there's nobody here, just, go upstairs." So I'm racing up the stairs. It's 2 flights in a very old Victorian house, and that everything's just about to come out of here, like in this roar. And I pull back the door, and I've obviously made a load of noise. And there's a Pilates class in there, all looking at me. So I shut the door quickly, raced downstairs, and somebody else in another room said, "No, you can't go in there, you can't go in there." Anyway, I went into what is known as room 4, which is the smallest room, and there was a big pile of cushions there, and just buried my face into these cushions. And I do know that that was the only time that I got caught on the hop like that, knowing that this tsunami was just needed to come. And I was amazed at myself, how I got so in tune with this. And I had this little vision in my head, you were talking about seeing it from above, Catherine. Well, I could sort of see me processing grief in the moment, sort of from above. And there was times when I didn't have a clue why I was doing this. It was linked with menopause. It was loss of my children, adult children, to estrangement. It was all sorts in those sort of late 50s, my late 50s, when I was just going through this huge cleansing. And and I had this little scenario where I'd think, okay, the doorway's open, what you were saying, Tanya. And it was like all the old griefs would say to one, "The gateway's open, boys. Come on, she's at it. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of this body. We've been in there for so long." So all this stuff would come charging out, and I used to think, "Oh, I'm putting poison in the planet, I'm all this bad energy." I had all that going on at the time. So I created this chute that actually goes in, sort of slide thing, where everything jumped on there and just shot into Mother Earth and got composted down. So this energy went into Mother Earth. So all this is going on in my head whilst I'm processing all this noise. And it's quite deeply uncomfortable when I'm doing it. And I haven't had a big one like that for ages. And I do recognize the healthiness of it, and it doesn't have to be like that for everybody. I recognize that, yeah, but thank you for letting me share that.
That's great.
Little story.
I love it. That grief is different for everybody. But here's the thing is, in my case, I had 2 pastors for my in-laws. Both my mother-in-law and my father-in-law were pastors, very intellectual people. And my father-in-law used to say, "We walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We don't pitch a tent and live there." And this is what I think a lot of people do, is they're like, "Oh, well, I'm in grief, so I'm just going to pitch my tent. I'm going to live here from now on." And that's not what we're meant to do. And I love when Catherine was talking about the big picture, because when we look at the earth, when we look at how much grief there is in the world and how people are not moving through it to the other side, I mean, we should be going out the other end of the valley, skipping and whistling a happy tune. We leave it there. We don't have to take it with us. Are there times when I still grieve my son? Absolutely. And I'll carry my pillow around and I'll hold that pillow and feel the weight of it. Are there times when I grieve the loss of my mother and my mother-in-law, my father-in-law? Yes, of course. But like Lorna said, it's so much more grief when they're still here, that we can't be together more. And I feel like after people pass, that we could be even closer with them than we can when they're here, because now we don't have all the stuff in the way of us being able to love each other. That's my thought about it, is like, it's so much easier because there's not all that relational static that happens in life. So it's actually somewhat easier. So I kind of agree with you, Lorna. It's easier after they pass. Because when they're here, you can see all the things that are wrong with the relationship, and, "Oh, I wish we could just get together, and couldn't this be better?" Maybe. And then other times it's like, that was the one person that understood me. That was the one person, and now they're not here, but now they're everywhere all the time. Depends on what you believe, really. Catherine,
Well,
what do you
that was
think
for
about
me
that?
when I was my dad. I was doing my Reiki, and the woman that was tuning us said, she described Dad, and of course my logical head's going, yeah, okay, she could get that from just looking at me, you know, and then and then she said something that he would definitely have said, and I just burst into tears. And although I thought I'd done my grieving, I just was like, and I didn't really know what was happening to me in that moment. Like you say, Sandy, it was like a tsunami. It just started coming up in that moment. And I thought, oh God, there was more there to come up in that. And then there was another time when it was Father's Day or something. And I was just out shopping and I didn't even know it was Father's Day. And I saw the Father's Day cards. And I was, he's not here to get a card for, because I was always the one that sent the cards. And yeah.
Yeah, and what's the problem with crying anyway?
Cuts you out anytime.
Right? It doesn't matter if you cry. Crying is cleansing. What's the
It
problem?
tends to be
People have
music for
crying.
me. It does tend to be music for me. There'll be a song can come on and I'll associate that to somebody, you know, and that does.
People always
usually it's
apologize
happy
for
tears.
crying. Yeah,
Happy
and people
tears.
apologizing for crying, apologizing for being emotional, for crying out loud. We're people. We're human beings. That's the way we receive the world, is through our emotions. If you can't express your emotion, that, you know, apologizing for being emotional, no, you should be celebrated for being emotional. It's okay. I mean, to a point. Obviously there's a point where it's like, okay, now it's just not healthy for you. But Catherine, tell me what you feel about that.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it does become unhealthy when it's held on to. I know I held on to that grief for my father for a very, very long time. But there was a point when my boys were at school and we moved them to a Steiner school, a Waldorf school. And I realized that actually he was there with me, because everywhere I looked was his name. You know, it was like the little, because it was in the countryside, the school was down a little lane, and opposite was a small building associated with an old hospital up on the hill. And it was called his name, Stanley House. And I thought, oh my God, yeah, that's right. And I found that actually I found more and more, I found his energy there. And the same thing happened with my mother. She sank into dementia. So in a way, there was that loss already while she was still in physical form. So when she actually passed over, it was, yes, it was sad and I cried, but it was more that for her, I knew it was a release. And I have had some fantastic releases of grief for her and with her. But seeing her just, whoa, you know, literally driving off in an old car, because she's now released from all of that and from all her grief. Because I realized actually that she had carried so much grief herself. And that was one of my questions, you know, this generational
Yeah, that's what
grief.
I wanted to ask you about. Like,
Yeah,
tell me
the
about that,
generational grief. Well, both my parents lost their fathers when they were young.
Mm.
Both their fathers had fought in the First World War. My father's father was injured, not from fighting, but he was injured in an air crash, a head injury. And unfortunately, he took his own life when it became too much. My father was only 11 and was the only male in the family. So he became the man of the family at 11 and had so much put on him. And of course, then was of fighting age during the Second World War and went through all of that and fought in North Africa, one of the bloodiest, biggest battles and all of those things. Never talked about it. But my mother had lost her father when she was about 6. And for him, you know, he saw her as his saving after the First World War. You know, she was his little girl. And so for him to disappear, so soon. So neither of them had this male energy coming through. And then, of course, she was involved in the Second World War as well as a nurse. And then after the war, her mother died. And then she had her first child. And then 3 years later, they moved to New Zealand, the other side of the world. So she had this loss and loss and loss. And then I was born, but she had a miscarriage before she had me. So there was another loss. And it was like, I realize now that actually, for some reason, I feel as though I've been carrying all of that, but I've managed to, I think, release it, to find that whatever any of them went through, they were just dealing with what life had thrown them. And I can look back and love them all, because I can understand now where all of that came from. But I feel that there was this underlying thing that was never talked about.
No.
Never talked about. No, and my mother had married during the war and her husband was killed 2 weeks later. So, it's like, oh my God, I can't, I don't want any more, it's like, oh.
So much.
So I think generational ones, grief can carry out. We can call it trauma, but it is grief.
Yes, it's definitely trauma and grief. It's both.
And grief. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because, when I'm working with people and we're doing theta healing, we're working on ancestral grief. We're working on that stuff that comes through the DNA of people who have had generations of loss, just like you're saying. And in the United States, there isn't anybody here that either left because they didn't have anything, had to come here because they were forced to, or had their family killed off. Everybody. So there's all kinds of ancestral grief going on. And it does seep into our DNA after generations of here. I mean, how many times do you have to hear the story? And then it's subconscious. So now you've heard the story of your mother having her husband die, 2 weeks later, did you say?
Yeah, 2 weeks later. I mean, I didn't even know that till I arrived in England at the age of 19.
Right. And so this is just stuffed in her, but
yeah,
energetically, we know we're passing that energy around all the time.
Yeah.
So there it is.
And she could never talk about it. She never talked about it. And it
avoiding
wasn't until I was looking after her, or, living with her. And she'd tell me about these really intense dreams she had where she remembered events, and she'd talk about things, and I just let her talk because I realized that it was finally coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty amazing what we find out later on when our parents are older. Amazing things that they live through, but they just, we are having this awakening now where people don't want to suppress their feelings anymore. They don't want to submerge and have it become a subconscious pattern that their body does that shows up in their life in all kinds of ways because they haven't dealt with it in some way that they need to. I mean, we have all these techniques and modalities and ways of doing things that all lead back to us being supported in a group, or at least with another person who helps guide us through. That's been the work that I've been doing for ages. I know you all too have been doing that. And the more of us that are doing it, I think, well, there's got to be a tipping point in there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
There's so many people doing the work of clearing up this old pain.
It's strange, isn't it? I think, just a couple of minutes ago, I think you were saying, that the collective grief, and it seems to me that we are scared of our feelings really, and to let go, and will we get sweat? This is probably why people keep it suppressed, or pretend to be happy, that spiritual bypassing thing. And yet not getting stuck in the mire of it. It's a dance, isn't it? It's a grief dance. It's like, and this collective grief, everybody's walking around on the street and I think, well, everybody's got a loss and we're all just, but this fear, I think, of being swept away by our feelings, I think is, you know, when Princess Diana died, you know, the amount, and again with Sinead O'Connor that's just recently died, you know, there's a massive sort of outpouring of realizations and people sharing things, and you know.
Absolutely. I mean, she was such a pioneer for that, and yet there were people already suffering and knowing that what she was saying was true. It was true. People were getting hurt. Children were being hurt. And, you know, as it starts to come out, then we start to see like how many people are walking around in this incredibly heavy grief over their childhood that was destroyed. And the fact is that we have to be able to say how we feel. We have to. I know a lot of people, and I tell this to people, your feelings will not overwhelm you when you have somebody here that's helping you move through it. There's so many techniques. I use a lot of emotional freedom technique to help people dial down what the physiology is while they're expressing their feelings. So you're expressing your feelings, and at the same time you're tapping acupuncture points, places where life force energy is moving through. And so even while you're having the feeling, and you might be sobbing your eyes out, and you're tapping at the same time, it's helping to bring it back into a normalization of that feeling. So yeah, you can be angry and swearing and tapping and have everything kind of settle. It's kind of amazing what we have available to us. It's theta healing, it's tapping. The other technique I use, bioenergetic synchronization technique, is working on subconscious emotional memories that are overriding present time, which is why people feel like I'll be overwhelmed if I let this out. I won't be able to handle myself. And yet what we're doing is coming at it completely sideways. So they don't even know that's what they're really thinking about. It's kind of interesting. I just had a patient on the table this morning, and I said, I want you to think of a positive feeling of trust. Well, you know how everybody says this to me, trust. Well, we all do. We all have trust issues. Many people were dropped as a baby. I mean, there's your trust issue right there. But I asked her to think of a positive feeling of trust, and she couldn't do it. And I said, now I want you to tell yourself, when you start going down that road of how I don't have any trust and I didn't trust that they were going to take, I said, then bring yourself back to, no, I'm looking for a positive feeling. So you're looking for those times like, I trust that summer will follow spring. I trust that night will follow day. Something simple. But they're looking at that relational kind of thing, and they get really stuck on that. And it's really just find an example of a positive feeling and see what you skip onto through it, skipping this stone through your life of, when did I feel trust? When was the first time I felt trust? It's an interesting exercise, and it clears up what's going on. I have another question here that we can talk about. Can grief be for things or places lost as well as people in similar process be worked through? I think so, yes, obviously. Yeah, you can have a grief for a thing or a place. I grieved my grandmother's house. It got sold after she died, but I smell toast and coffee. I'm right back there. Toast and coffee at the same time. It has to be at the same time. And then I can feel her presence too.
Yeah, well,
So-
I grieved New Zealand, you know, very intensely for a long time, and I didn't go back for 35 years. And you know, I just had to see a picture on a film or something, and I'd be there, and I'd think, oh, you know. And in fact, when I was back there and I was driving around, apart from really feeling the physicalness of the landscape, I actually had my father there as well, which was wonderful, because I'd go, Dad, do you remember that? It's just the same, you know, whatever. So that was good. But the one big thing that I've grieved is I built a house there, and it was like another child. It was my creation. And I've no idea if any family will watch this, to hell with it now. But since I came back, because something went wrong with the finances, it was like it was just so awful that it's never talked about. It's like, oh, that was just such a bad mistake. You can't. So I've never actually been able to sort of process the fact that, yeah, I did this. Yeah, this happened. But actually, you know, it wasn't the end of the world. So, you know, it's a place and a thing. And I've been trying to grieve it, and somebody just says, "Oh, we don't want to go. You're selfish, you know, whatever." And yet it wasn't.
No,
I wouldn't
you
have minded
you
it. I wouldn't have
created.
minded if they just said you were bloody stupid or whatever. But acknowledging that actually it was something
You
real.
created it
Yeah,
out of your creation, out of your mind.
yeah,
This is very similar to having a baby that doesn't live. I
yeah.
created this baby, and I had one person that brought a balloon to the memorial service that said it's a boy. She acknowledged that I had a baby. I mean, that was a big deal. I never had a baby before. So just like you, like, what's the thing that you've created and it's discounted because it didn't work out? No.
Yeah, no,
Created
that,
it.
yes. So that was my big thing. Yeah, apart from a few, you know, little things, but I think that's the major thing. Yeah,
Do you have a picture of it?
I do. Yes, I can walk through it. I can be walking through it now. You know, I can feel it. I can feel the energy in it. And then everybody who visited it sort of just came and went, "Wow, what a beautiful, serene, calm house." I mean, I didn't have children in it. I did have 2 little cats, and then unfortunately one of the kittens was killed on the road outside. And I know I didn't really grieve her either. You know, but it had such fabulous memories.
Oh,
Even for
yeah.
just 2 years, it was just like, wow.
Doesn't matter how long.
No,
It's what was in it, and that was you that was in it.
yeah,
It was
totally. Yeah.
yours. Yeah, absolutely. These things are so important for us to share, of like, here's something I did, here's something that I created. Especially if it's your own, out of your own head, out of your own creation, that you did this. It's amazing what can happen when you acknowledge the amazing. I mean, you're creating all the time.
Trying
You're
to, yeah.
person.
Yeah, I mean, I am a creative person, yeah. So, and it was my original training in architecture. So in a way it was, because I gave up architecture a long time ago, it was my true output for that part of my creative journey.
Absolutely.
It was my swan song of it, in a way. I always remember my uncle, who was an architect, who uncle-in-law, you know, he wasn't blood relation, but he was an architect, and he always used to talk about that feeling. And I thought, wow, that was wonderful, you know. But to have just had acknowledgement that, yeah, this may have gone wrong, whatever, but what you did was bloody fantastic.
Yeah.
I think my own younger son's the only one who's ever done that. All the rest have just said, "Oh, you were, you know."
Don't listen to them.
So I've decided I'm not going to anymore. No.
Yeah, please. I mean, what didn't one of you post recently that it was, you know, be around people that celebrate you and support you?
Yep.
Don't be around people that criticize and tear you down. There's nobody that has to say, you're not required to have those people around you. If you have them around you out of obligation, quit it right now. Quit it right now. Only have people out of love. There's a lot going on there.
You're bringing up some memories for me here, because I'd forgotten about, you had said, Tanya, about the, you know, people wheeling over an animal, and then Captain, you mentioned you had 2 cats. I'm like, oh my God, when I first got married, I was living on my own in this house, and I hated being on my own. And so I got a cat. I got a kitten, and the kitten came everywhere with me. It would come in the car, and I'd take it over to my mother to babysit for this kitten while I was going to work, because I didn't want to leave it in its own house. And eventually, my mother's like, "Come on, Lorna, you've got to, you've got to let this cat go and fend for itself and stuff." And I ran it over. I did. I ran the poor cat over because. And I didn't know I'd run it over. I blamed the next door neighbour. But when I saw it lying dead in the road, I totally flipped out, freaked out, and running home to my mum. And my mum, or I phoned my mum, and she came over, and she said, and she said to my dad, "Do not mention cat when Lorna comes here. Please do not mention the cat." And as soon as I walked in, Dad just looked at me and went, "So you killed the cat then?" And started laughing at me. And I was just like, "Whoa." I had to stay away from that home for 2 weeks because I couldn't bear to go back, because I had run over my poor cat. The cat wasn't scared of cars because I took her everywhere in the car. So she came running out to greet me, and I didn't even notice that I had run her over. And I forgot all about that until you mentioned cats here, Catherine. And I was thinking about what you said, Tanya. And then there's been another couple of memories coming up. And I remember women in the village dressed in black, always. They didn't come out of black up from the war, the Second World War. They were just, but I was told to stay away from one of them because they said she was a witch. And it's like, she probably had a spiritual awakening and of some sort, and they
Probably
thought she
would have
was a
been your
witch.
best friend.
Yes. Well, she gave me sweeties, and I was told not to take sweets from her, but I just, I know her as a kid, I thought she was great. But it was that morning that when they went into black, they had to stay there, and they couldn't remarry. They'd have to stay in mourning. So these memories have just been popping up while we've been sitting chatting as well. So quite interesting. And I suffered with chronic homesickness when I left home, but I don't believe that's what it was. I'm going to sit with this after we go off the call, because I'm like, oh, that's weird. Because when we moved first down here, I was just beside myself. And every time I'd actually get physically sick leaving home. And this is the part of the world I've always craved and grieved for whenever I went anywhere else. It's a strange one. And then my daughter's just back from New Zealand, and she's wanting to come home, and I don't know, it's just this part of the world, and yet I open up my curtains every morning and go, the weather again, I need to move. And then I think, would I be able to move? Because I've just grieved every time I've left this place to go anywhere else to live. I've lived in Yorkshire, I've lived in Germany. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Weird.
That's happened to me too. I moved from the Jersey Shore, where the beach was 3 blocks from my house. The bay was 3 blocks from my house. I moved away, and every day I would get up and look at the sun coming up in the east and go, I know what that looks like over the beach. I know what that looks like over the beach, and would have that in my head. I know what that sun coming up looks like. And it took me probably 9 years of living in our former house to say, when we came home from vacation, oh, I'm home. Because to me, going on vacation was going home, 1,100 miles away. And so it was like, this is not my home. This is just where I live. My home is somewhere. And now, they say you can't go home again. Well, you can't. It's not the same. It's changed.
Yeah, I found I had to live in a different part of the country to the parts I knew. But that part of the country spoke to me as well, that this was where you need to be. And it was going home, and it was reconnecting, and it was finding out more about myself. Because I left at quite a vulnerable age, 19. I wasn't an adult.
Right.
I hadn't experienced it as an adult. And I'd had a very intense year before, obviously losing my father. So, it was fantastic. And in fact, that helped me produce and have my most creative period.
Beautiful. Yeah, transmuting it into something beautiful.
Yeah, and so I'm now writing about it,
Love
or trying to.
You're creating again,
Love
Catherine.
that.
You're
Yeah.
creating again.
Yeah, I grieved my childhood for a long time because at age 11, I was put into a situation that I should not have been put into. I was sexually assaulted at age 11 in a foreign country. And it was the turning point of my life when I look back on it now and say, yes, there's been many turning points. The birth of our son was one of them, of our son that didn't live. We have a son that did. He's 27. He's beautiful, very handsome. And but having that happen at 11 and going, oh, okay, I know what all this stuff is. And that idea of peeking behind the curtain before you're really ready to. And nobody knows, nobody asked, nobody found out, nobody even mentioned so what happened to you while you were there? Nothing.
Oh, I had
And
the same
so,
thing.
yeah, not having words to experience it. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s and I was like, oh, that's sexual assault. What happened? That was what happened. So having that happen and going, oh, now I get it. I've been doing all this work since my 20s to clear up things in my life. And now I finally get it, what that was. So yeah, sometimes it takes a while. And
It
then
took
you
me
have
50
to,
years, yeah,
yeah. And I was
before
glad.
it came out. Yes.
I was
Yeah.
glad that I had done all that work. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, now I can experience this. And I know how to deal with it in some ways, in other ways I don't, because 11-year-old Tanya didn't know. So you know, I grew myself up and went, oh, I can work on this with all these people I know who are healers. So I get to go to these people and say, let's work on this. I need to deal with this and see it that way. And that happens to a lot of girls and boys too. You don't find out until later. Oh, that's what happened. Interesting. No wonder I had all this reaction and impetus to become a healer and do healing with people.
There's something about ceremony as well. What you were saying, Catherine, you know, about ceremony. And I've got a piece of work to do, visit my childhood home, and there's 70 acres that has held my childhood energy on, you know, and at some point, possibly this year, maybe next, well, probably this year, is for me to go and do a ceremonial walk around those fields that I probably have stood or done something, driven a car or a vehicle or ridden on something or walked every little square inch of those 70 acres. And the buildings that I used to work in are now homes, quite high-end homes. You know, there's a barn and a stable and a mistle, and it's strange seeing those houses it become homes, you know, where I used to like do lots of animal husbandry and mucking out, and so there is a part of me to go and sort of like, I feel like I'm going to collect my childhood, and I don't quite know. It feels like I want to do something like have a bag and collect things. I don't quite know. But, and also I've got a friend who's shamanic, and take her with me, and so that we can walk this land together and discuss and share. And so it does feel a bit like some sort of pilgrimage. And you know, you sharing your house in New Zealand, Catherine, it sort of made me think, you know, that same sort of a ceremony around it all, you know. And I know that with my children, there's many a time that I've gone to the river, and these adult children who have distanced themselves from me, there's been some letting go ceremonies that I've, you know, at one point I wanted to have a funeral, and it's not for them, but for the relationship, and putting roses onto the river and like doing that sort of ceremonial letting go, I think really helps with the grieving process, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've floated our son's ashes down a river. And actually this spring, my sister and I took my mother's ashes and mixed them in the sand at the end of the street, in the beach where we grew up, where she grew up. And having those rituals that we do really helps to bookend things for us. So I highly suggest that you do that, Cindy. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I
Beautiful.
I did that with my mother's ashes. Well, half her ashes were taken back to New Zealand,
Mhm,
so they're with Dad.
mhm.
And then the rest sat here, and of course then we had lockdown and all the rest of it, and nothing happened. And then having done this other work through her and through her parents and everything, it was like she said one week, right, come on, you've got to do it. It was like everywhere I went, I saw number plates with mum, you know, the letters mum, and even on the side of a bus. And it was like, well, okay. So I got up one morning and I went, and she lived in Eastbourne, but further inland, and I just went off and I went to up the downs on the hill above where she'd lived. And I arrived at the top and looked at my phone, not having a watch, and it said 11 o'clock. And I thought, great, okay. Then I went through and I scattered her ashes around. And after I'd finished, and it was really quiet, I walked back down through these trees and a little robin started to sing. And I looked at my phone and it said 11:11.
Oh,
And this was on the 11th of the 11th. So it was Armistice Day in England. So it was very pertinent, 11th hour, you know, the 11th minute of the 11th hour on the 11th month and all the rest of it, 11th day of the 11th month. But when I walked back round the hill,
Oh, I love that.
Cloudy day, and suddenly I sort of saw, the sun had sort of broken through, and I looked back around me across a field with some sheep and through a gap and some trees and across a cemetery, which there, and the sun was lighting up the house that she'd lived in with my stepfather. It was like, what? It's you know, it was like full Technicolor. And then I went round the corner to a little plant nursery, and this was November in England, and there was this white iris in full flower, just one white iris. And I went, oh, okay, well, right, thanks, yeah, that's what you wanted, because she'd loved irises. And when I was about 6, I cut one of them and took it into school for a flower competition. Didn't ask her permission. And it won, you know, an old coin's either a florin or a half crown, you know. And when I got home from school, she was really angry with me. And I said, but Mum, it won, you know, and I've got this money. Anyway, so it was her personal message to me, just to me. And then later on that day, that's when I woke up from a snooze and I saw her just driving off, smiling and happy in this old sports car. And I thought, she's released now, she's processed whatever she needs to, off she goes. So, I mean, that was pure magic. And it was my little ceremony. And I know I didn't involve the rest of the family, but she asked me to do it. But I took all of them with me. I took all their energy. When I set off and got to the top of the hill, I actually said, right, you're all here with me doing this.
that's so beautiful, Catherine. Thank
Do you
for
know what I love
sharing.
about that 11:11, Catherine, is that every time I hear anybody mention it, I just see these doors opening. Like
Yeah.
Tanya mentioned it being a
And the fact that a robin
portal.
sang, you know,
That's
because
what I
a
think
robin
when I
is,
think of 11.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was just, wow.
Perfect.
It's like a perfect little movie, what you described, of how we can really be close to our loved one and honor them after they pass. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing that, Catherine. That was just beautiful. Now I'm going to look for white irises. I think I've ever seen a white iris. We have lots of them, but not white ones.
No, pure white, just all
Pure
white.
white.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And there was another plant behind it called angel wings.
Beautiful. I'll have to look that one up. We're getting close to our hour, and I would love to just share a funny story, and then do a little prayer for everyone. That's okay with you all? Great. So the funny story is, we're having this terrible experience of losing our son. And it's tiring to be in grief. And people come and visit and they are crying and kind of want you to cry with them. Like, you're so sad. And Ed and I are not very sad people. We're just normally pretty happy. Well, he is. I'm kind of moody, but we're having this, we just needed some relief from the grief, right? Just like, can we just have something fun happen? A friend of ours showed up with terrible tooth pain and a box of stuff for us, trashy magazines and some wine. And it was so good to be able to help somebody else in our grief and know that we were helping him get through his tooth pain. But we're laying on the couch watching television, and a commercial came on that said, "There's nothing worse than a yeast infection." And we went, "Oh, thank God we don't have a yeast infection," because apparently what we're going through is not even close to having a yeast infection. So we were rolling on the floor laughing at that. And it just, sometimes you just need a break from being sad. So I am all for gallows humor. Doesn't bother me at all. And it's very important to have something to laugh at because it is a good healer, one of the best. So do you feel complete?
Yeah, thank
We
you.
could
Yeah,
go on for another
good.
hour, I'm sure. But so let's all take a nice deep breath. Imagine that you're breathing up through the top of your head, up through your crown chakra, up into love, light, source energy, up into the center of the universe, wherever that is. And as you exhale, let that energy come back down through all layers, all levels, down through the center of your body, down through all the chakras, down through your feet, down into the core of the earth. As I say these words in the I am for everyone listening. God is all there is. Love is all there is. Light, life, and source energy is all there is. And I recognize right here and right now that I am one with God, love, light, life, and source energy. And I'm never, ever separated from this energy. It's in every cell, molecule, and atom, and all the space in between. And if I feel separated from it, I know it's a false feeling. And all I have to do is breathe in, inspiration, inviting spirit in, and exhale gratitude. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with people who support the grieving process, with people who love to help. The helpers are the ones we want to watch. I'm so grateful to have this soft place to land in this supportive group. And with these women who share so easily and so openly what they've been through. And to know that we're never, ever alone. It might feel that way, but people do move on. They pass, and we're all going to do it. Can't be that bad if we're all going to do it. How bad could it be? So instead of judging it, I feel like maybe we could just count it all joy. And remember that the grief highlights what's good too. It actually gives it this beautiful contrast so that we could see what's loving, what's good, what's special, what's so delicious and comforting and comfortable in our lives. It's important to remember that we have both light and dark, and both are good, and both help each other move through our lives. As we walk through that valley, we don't live there. We move through it. We find a reason to move on, knowing that as we do, we're growing and maturing and becoming the infinite beings that we already are. We're waking up to it. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful for all the contrast here on the physical plane so that I can see what I prefer, what preferences are mine, what is okay for me, what is not okay, where are my boundaries. And I'm grateful for those who are cheering me on behind that thin veil, all my guides, my guardian angels, my spirit helpers, those loved ones who have passed on before me, who are cheering me on from there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I authorize my subconscious to let it be so, to dissolve any constrictions or contractions that are keeping me from my highest good. Bring them forward and let me experience them in a safe and loving environment. I say that it's so, and I let it go, knowing that it's already done. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so it is. And when you're listening to that prayer, you can change any of the words you want. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing yourselves so beautifully. I just want to make that movie, Catherine. That just sounds awesome. Such a beautiful picture of that. I want to go on Sunday's quest with her to reconnect and release. And I want to go see Lorna so badly. And I'm here in the US. So someday I'm coming to you, Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're so precious to me.
Thank you.
So, many blessings.
Bye.
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 I stopped the stream.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Sunday.
That was great. That was really great.
I hope so. It was really beautiful. You guys just blow me away. I wish I could just have you as a little coven here in my house when people come in. My coven's coming. I'm creating one here with some healers that I'm working with. We're sharing healing, and they're all musicians, so we're sharing music too. So we'll have something for the silver tent soon, I think. I'm hoping. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for all of you. Appreciate it so much.
Okay, and I'll send the recording to Fran and she'll upload it onto YouTube.
Yay!
Yay.
Still recording.
Thanks
Well,
for
am I still recording?
Oh, you're
Yeah.
still recording.
Yeah.
Stop recording.